The rain came down steady that October night in Los Angeles, the kind of rain that makes the whole city smell fresh and clean. Keanu Reeves stepped out of his favorite little diner just past midnight, pulling his jacket collar up against the chill. He'd been coming to this same spot for years now, long after most people had gone home. There was something peaceful about the empty streets, the way the city breathed differently when nobody was watching. He was 59 now, and these quiet walks had become his way of staying connected to the real world. When you're famous, really famous, everything can start feeling like a bubble. People treat you different. They want something from you. But at midnight on a Tuesday, walking past closed shops and quiet apartments, he was just another guy trying to clear his head. Keanu walked slowly, hands in his pockets, watching the way the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. He passed the old record store, the closed flower shop, the parking lot where someone had painted a mural of dolphins. He knew every crack in these sidewalks by now. This was his routine, his meditation, his way of remembering who he was before all the movies and red carpets. Then something made him stop. He wasn't sure what at first. Maybe it was a sound or maybe just a feeling. There was a narrow alley between two buildings, the kind of place most people would walk right past without a second thought. But Keanu heard something coming from the shadows. Someone was humming. The melody was so soft he almost missed it, but once he caught it, he couldn't unhear it. The song was old, something from the 80s. He knew it instantly, though he couldn't remember the name right away. But more than that, he knew the voice, or at least he thought he did. His heart started beating faster, which seemed crazy. Voices change over the years. People change. It had been so long. He took a few steps into the alley, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness. There was a figure there, huddled against the brick wall under a pile of blankets that had seen better days. Cardboard boxes were arranged like a makeshift shelter. A small backpack sat nearby, along with a plastic bag that probably held everything this person owned. The humming stopped. The figure shifted, and Keanu could see it was a woman. She looked up at him with tired eyes, the kind of tiredness that goes bone deep, that comes from too many nights without real sleep, too many days without knowing where the next meal would come from. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Keanu's breath caught in his throat. Even in the dim light from the street, even with the years and hardship written across her face, he knew her. He absolutely knew her. It was like being hit by lightning and falling through time all at once. Her name was Jennifer Cole. And she'd been his first real girlfriend back in Toronto, back when he was just a kid with big dreams and no idea if any of them would come true. They'd been teenagers together, both 17, both convinced they had the whole world figured out. They'd spend hours at the public library talking about the future, about art and movies and all the places they wanted to go. She used to make him laugh so hard he'd forget to be nervous about auditions. Jennifer had wanted to be a photographer. She carried an old camera everywhere, always looking for the perfect shot. She'd take pictures of random things like rust patterns on fire escapes or the way light came through tree branches. She said she wanted to show people the beauty in ordinary moments. Keanu remembered thinking she saw the world differently than anyone he'd ever met. They'd dated for almost 2 years. It felt like forever when you're that young. She was there for his first real acting role, a tiny part in a local theater production. She sat in the front row every single night, even though the play was terrible. When he got the chance to move to Los Angeles to really try to make it as an actor, she'd been the one who convinced him to go. She said some people were meant for bigger things, and he was one of them. He'd promised to come back for her. They'd made plans. Young, stupid, beautiful plans about how they'd make it work, how distance didn't matter when you really loved someone. But life doesn't care much about the promises teenagers make. He got busy. She got busy. The calls became less frequent. The letters stopped coming. Eventually, they just drifted apart the way young couples do, until she was just a memory he thought about sometimes late at night. Now here she was, 30-some years later, living in an alley. And she had no idea who he was. Keanu could see it in her eyes. She was looking at him the way homeless people look at strangers, trying to figure out if he was a threat or just another person who'd walk past like she wasn't even there. There was no recognition, no spark of memory. The girl who used to know every thought in his head was looking at him like he was nobody. His mind was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't just blurt out who he was. That would be too much, too shocking. She looked fragile, like someone who'd been holding on by her fingernails for way too long. The last thing she needed was more chaos. So instead, he did what felt natural. He took off his jacket, the nice warm one he'd been wearing, and held it out to her. His hands were shaking slightly, but he hoped she wouldn't notice in the dark. "It's cold tonight," he said quietly. "Please take this." Jennifer stared at the jacket, then at him, suspicion and surprise mixing on her face. People didn't usually offer kindness without wanting something in return. Keanu knew that. He'd seen enough of the world to understand how hard it made people when they'd been let down too many times. "I don't need charity," she said, and her voice was rough, like she didn't use it much anymore. But underneath the roughness, he heard it. The same voice that used to sing along to the radio in his beat-up car. The same voice that used to whisper encouragement before auditions. "It's not charity," Keanu said, and he meant it. "It's just a jacket. I've got plenty more at home. You'd actually be doing me a favor. This thing's been taking up space in my closet." It was a lie, but a kind one. The jacket was one of his favorites, but he'd give her everything he owned right now if he thought she'd accept it. Jennifer studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took the jacket. Her hands were cold when they briefly touched his. She pulled the jacket around her shoulders, and for just a second, something flickered across her face. Not recognition exactly, but maybe a memory of a time when people were kind, when the world felt safer. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu wanted to say so much. He wanted to tell her who he was, wanted to scoop her up and fix everything right that second, but he knew better. You can't rush into something like this. Trust takes time, especially when someone's been surviving on the streets. So instead, he just nodded. "There's a diner around the corner," he said. "They know me there. If you go in tomorrow and tell them Kay sent you, they'll give you breakfast. On me." "Kay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just Kay." He turned to walk away before he could change his mind, before he could do something stupid like cry right there in the alley. But before he left, he looked back one more time. Jennifer was pulling the jacket tighter around herself, and for just a moment, in the way she tilted her head, he saw the girl she used to be. Keanu walked back to his car in a daze. His mind couldn't quite process what had just happened. The girl who'd believed in him before anyone else did. The girl who'd kissed him for the first time behind the movie theater. The girl who'd held his hand and told him he could be anything he wanted. That girl was living in an alley, while he'd been building a career and a life. While he'd been walking red carpets and signing autographs, she'd been fighting just to survive. He sat in his car for a long time, rain drumming on the roof, trying to figure out what to do next. One thing was certain. He'd be back tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that, if that's what it took. He didn't know how he was going to help her yet, but he knew he had to try, because some debts can never be repaid, but that doesn't mean you stop trying. And Jennifer Cole had given him something precious all those years ago. She'd given him belief. Now it was his turn to give that back to her, even if she didn't remember why. Keanu barely slept that night. He kept seeing Jennifer's face, the way the years and struggle had changed her but hadn't completely erased who she'd been. Every time he closed his eyes, he was 17 again, holding her hand on the bus, listening to her talk about the photographs she wanted to take someday. The memories came flooding back with painful clarity. The next evening, he returned to the alley with a thermos of hot soup and some bread from the diner. His hands were sweating despite the cool air. He felt nervous, like a kid on a first date, which seemed ridiculous given the circumstances. But this mattered. She mattered. Jennifer was there, sitting on her cardboard, his jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. When she saw him approaching, she tensed up, then seemed to recognize him from the night before. Her expression softened just slightly. "You came back," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. "Told you I would," Keanu said, holding out the thermos. "Thought you might be hungry." This time she didn't argue. She took the soup and drank it slowly, savoring each sip like it was the best thing she'd tasted in months. It probably was. Keanu sat down on an old crate a few feet away, giving her space but staying close enough to talk if she wanted to. "You really don't want anything?" Jennifer asked after a while, eyeing him with that same cautious suspicion. Most people, they want something. A story or a picture or just to feel good about themselves. "I just want to sit here if that's okay," Keanu said honestly. "The streets are pretty quiet this time of night." "Nice place to think." She studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself." They sat in silence for a while, and Keanu found himself okay with that. Some of his best memories with Jennifer had been quiet moments, just existing together without needing to fill every second with words. He wanted to ask her 1,000 questions, wanted to know every detail of how she'd ended up here, but he held back. Push too hard and she'd disappear. He knew that instinctively. Over the next week, this became their routine. Every night around midnight, Keanu would show up with food, sometimes coffee, once even a blanket he said he didn't need anymore. They'd sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes not. He never told her his real name, just stuck with Kay, and Jennifer, for her part, seemed content with having one person in the city who saw her as human. On the fourth night, she started talking. Really talking. She told him about leaving Toronto years ago with big dreams of becoming a professional photographer. She'd moved to New York first, worked 3 jobs while taking pictures whenever she could. For a few years, it actually worked. She got some of her photos in small galleries, had a couple pieces bought by collectors, nothing huge, but enough to make her think she might actually make it. I had this tiny studio apartment in Brooklyn, she said, staring at nothing. It was basically a closet, but it had great light in the mornings. I'd wake up and feel like the luckiest person alive, you know? Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Keanu nodded, remembering that feeling from his own early days in Los Angeles. That mixture of poverty and possibility, when you're too young and driven to care that you're eating ramen for the 5th night in a row. Then Jennifer's parents died. Both of them, within 6 months of each other. Her dad had a heart attack and her mom just seemed to give up after that, fading away until cancer took her. Jennifer was their only child. She flew back to Toronto for the funerals, handled all the arrangements, sold their house. By the time she got back to New York, something inside her had shifted. I couldn't take pictures anymore, she said quietly. Every time I looked through the camera, all I saw was everything I'd lost. My parents, my childhood home. All these years I'd spent chasing dreams while they got older. I kept thinking about all the visits I'd skipped because I was busy, all the phone calls I'd kept short because I had somewhere to be. The grief had pulled her under like a riptide. She'd started missing work, missing deadlines. Her savings from her parents' estate should have been enough to keep her afloat, but medical bills started piling up. Depression is expensive when you're trying to treat it properly, and then expensive in different ways when you can't. I started having these panic attacks, Jennifer continued. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Lost my apartment because I couldn't handle being alone in it. Stayed with friends for a while, but you can only crash on someone's couch for so long before they start avoiding you. There was a fire, she told him. The storage unit where she'd kept all her photography work, her parents' photo albums, everything she owned that mattered, it all burned. Faulty wiring, the fire department said. Nothing suspicious, just bad luck. Insurance paid out almost nothing. After that, she just started drifting. I ended up here because I heard the weather was better, she said with a bitter laugh. Isn't that stupid? Like sunshine makes homelessness more bearable. Keanu felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. All those years while he'd been making movies and building a life, she'd been fighting battles he couldn't imagine. And the cruelest part was that she'd ended up in Los Angeles, the same city where he'd found all his success, probably passing within miles of him dozens of times without either of them knowing. You're a photographer, Keanu said suddenly, remembering. You wanted to capture ordinary moments and make them extraordinary. Jennifer's head snapped up, eyes wide. How did you know that? Keanu froze. He'd slipped up, let a detail through that the stranger shouldn't know. His mind raced for an explanation. You mentioned galleries before. Just sounded like something an artist would say. She looked at him for a long moment, and he couldn't tell if she believed him or not. But then she just nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I used to say. Feels like a lifetime ago. After she fell asleep that night, Keanu sat in his car and made phone calls. He had resources, connections, people who owed him favors. By morning, he had a private investigator looking into Jennifer's background. Not because he didn't believe her, but because he needed to understand the full picture. If he was going to help, he needed to know what he was dealing with. The report came back 2 days later, and it was worse than he'd thought. Medical debt in the tens of thousands, multiple emergency room visits for panic attacks and malnutrition, a trail of homeless shelters across 3 states, assault charges filed and dropped, probably from incidents on the street, 3 attempts to get into rehab programs, all unsuccessful, a restraining order against someone who'd harassed her at a shelter. The investigator also found her old photography work, A gallery in Brooklyn still had some of her pieces archived online. Keanu spent hours looking at them, seeing the world through her eyes. She'd been good. Really good. Her photos had this quality of finding light in unexpected places. Beauty in things most people overlooked. There was one shot of a kid's sneaker lying in a puddle, and somehow she'd made it look profound, like it was telling a whole story about childhood and loss and time passing. He bought every piece the gallery still had. They were confused. Some collector they'd never heard of suddenly wanting to purchase work from an artist who disappeared years ago. But money talks, and Keanu had plenty of it. He had the photos shipped to his house where he hung them in his private office, a reminder of what Jennifer had been and could be again. On the 8th night, Keanu brought something different. Along with the usual food, he had a small digital camera. Nothing fancy, just a basic point-and-shoot he'd picked up at a drugstore. "What's this?" Jennifer asked suspiciously. "You said you used to take pictures," Keanu said. "Thought maybe you'd want to again." "I can't," she said immediately, pushing the camera away. "I told you I can't do that anymore." "You don't have to," Keanu said gently. "But maybe just having it around would feel good? Or maybe you'll see something worth capturing. No pressure either way." She stared at the camera like it might bite her. Then slowly, carefully, she picked it up. Her hands remembered how to hold it, fingers finding the buttons automatically. Something flickered across her face, pain and longing mixed together. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, and her voice cracked. "You don't even know me." Keanu's throat tightened. He wanted so badly to tell her the truth. To say, "I do know you. I've always known you. You were the first person who made me believe I could be somebody." But he couldn't. Not yet. "Maybe I just think everyone deserves a second chance," he said instead. That night, after he left, Keanu sat in his car and watched from a distance as Jennifer raised the camera to her eye for the first time. She didn't take a picture, just looked through the viewfinder at the empty alley, the wet streets, the city sleeping around her. But it was a start. He returned the next night and found that she'd taken 3 photos. She showed them to him shyly, like a student showing work to a teacher. They were simple shots: a puddle reflecting streetlights, a pigeon on a fire escape, graffiti on a wall. But they had that same quality her old work had, that ability to make you see something ordinary as if for the first time. "These are beautiful," Keanu said, and he meant it. "They're just snapshots," Jennifer said, but he could hear the pride underneath her self-deprecation. "Nothing is just a snapshot when you're the one taking it," he told her. Over the following weeks, something began to shift. Jennifer started taking more pictures, filling the camera's memory card with images of her life on the streets. Sometimes she'd talk about what she'd photographed, the stories behind the images. A woman who shared her spot under a bridge. The guy who ran the corner store and sometimes let homeless people use the bathroom. The way morning light hit the downtown buildings. She was coming back to life, slowly, like a plant finally getting water after a long drought. And Keanu was there for all of it. This stranger named Kay, who showed up every night with food and conversation, never asking for anything in return, just existing beside her in the quiet hours when the rest of the city slept. But he knew this couldn't last forever. Winter was coming and the streets would get colder. Jennifer's cough was getting worse, a deep rattle in her chest that scared him every time he heard it. He needed to do more than bring soup and cameras. He needed to really help her. The question was how to do that without overwhelming her, or making her feel like a charity case. Because he knew Jennifer Cole even if she didn't remember him, and he knew that her pride was as much a part of her as her talent with a camera. Push too hard and she'd run. Move too fast and he'd lose her all over again. So he waited, and planned, and hoped he'd know the right moment when it came. The temperature dropped hard the 3rd week of November. Los Angeles doesn't get brutal winters, but when you're sleeping on concrete, every degree matters. Keanu showed up with extra blankets, hand warmers, a better sleeping bag than the thin one Jennifer had been using. She accepted these gifts more easily now, the walls between them slowly coming down. But that cough of hers kept getting worse. He'd hear it from halfway down the block, a deep, wet sound that rattled in her chest like something was breaking loose inside. She tried to hide it, turning away when the coughing fits hit, but Keanu could see how much it took out of her. After each episode, she'd need a minute just to catch her breath. "You should see a doctor," he told her one night, trying to keep his voice casual even though worry was eating him alive. "Can't afford a doctor," Jennifer said matter-of-factly. "Besides, it's just a cold. It'll pass." Free clinics exist, Keanu pressed. I could take you. She gave him a look, that familiar, stubborn set to her jaw he remembered from 30 years ago. Some things never changed. I'm fine, Kay, really, but she wasn't fine. Any fool could see that. Her skin had taken on a grayish tone, and sometimes her hands shook even when it wasn't cold. Keanu started checking on her earlier in the evenings, unable to wait until midnight, needing to know she was okay. Then came the night that changed everything. Keanu arrived at 7 instead of his usual time, something nagging at him all day that he needed to check on her sooner. The moment he turned into the alley, he knew something was wrong. Jennifer wasn't sitting up like usual. She was lying on her side, the blankets pulled around her but her whole body shaking. He ran the last few yards and dropped to his knees beside her. "Jennifer?" She didn't respond. Her eyes were half open but unfocused, and when he touched her forehead, her skin was burning up. The fever was so high he could feel the heat radiating off her. Her breathing came in short, shallow gasps, punctuated by that terrible cough. "Jennifer, can you hear me?" he said urgently, gently shaking her shoulder. Nothing. She was barely conscious, lost somewhere deep inside the fever. Keanu didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, blankets and all, and carried her to his car. She weighed almost nothing, light as a child, and that scared him more than anything. He'd known she'd lost weight, but holding her like this, feeling how fragile she'd become, it hit him like a punch to the gut. He drove faster than he should have, one hand on the wheel, the other holding Jennifer against him to keep her from sliding off the seat. She mumbled something he couldn't understand, her head lolling against his shoulder. He talked to her the whole way, saying anything to fill the silence, to pretend this was going to be okay. "You're going to be fine," he said. "I'm taking you somewhere safe. They'll fix you up. You'll be taking pictures again before you know it. Remember that shot you showed me yesterday? The one of the cat in the window? That was incredible. You've still got it, Jennifer. You've still got that eye." Cedars-Sinai Medical Center lit up ahead of them, and Keanu pulled right up to the emergency entrance, not caring about parking. He carried Jennifer through the automatic doors, and the change in his demeanor must have been dramatic because nurses came running immediately. "She needs help," Keanu said, his famous composure cracking. "She's burning up. Pneumonia, maybe, I don't know. Please, you have to help her." They got Jennifer onto a gurney, medical staff swarming around her, asking questions. Keanu answered as best he could. Name, age, medical history. He knew some details from the investigator's report, guessed at others. When they asked about insurance, he cut them off. "I'm paying for everything," he said. "Whatever she needs, I don't care what it costs. Just help her." The nurse looked at him more closely, recognition dawning. "Mr. Reeves?" "Yes," he said, too worried to care about being recognized. "She needs the best care you can give her. Private room, best doctors, everything." They rushed Jennifer away to start treatment, and Keanu was left in the waiting room, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He'd been so focused on getting her here that he hadn't let himself feel the fear. Now it crashed over him like a wave. What if he'd been too late? What if that stubborn pride of hers had cost her everything? He called his assistant, woke her up even though it was late, and told her to make sure everything was handled. The hospital bills, a private room, whatever Jennifer needed. Money wasn't real to him anyway, just numbers in an account. But Jennifer's life, that was real. That mattered. The doctors came out 2 hours later. Severe pneumonia, they said. Malnutrition. Dehydration. If he'd brought her in even a day later, it might have been too different story. She was stable now, they assured him, on antibiotics and fluids, but she'd need to stay for a while. Her body had been through too much to bounce back quickly. Keanu stayed at the hospital all night, sleeping in a chair in Jennifer's room. The nurses tried to tell him he could go home, that they'd call if anything changed, but he refused. He'd left her once before, all those years ago. He wasn't leaving again. Jennifer slept for 36 hours straight, her body finally getting the rest it desperately needed. Keanu watched over her, studied her face in the soft light of the hospital room. He could see the girl she'd been underneath the years and hardship. The way her nose crinkled slightly, the shape of her hands, fingers that had once held his, that had pointed out interesting shots to photograph, that had touched his face when they kissed. When she finally woke up, confusion filled her eyes. She looked around at the clean white room, the IV in her arm, the monitors beeping softly. Then her gaze landed on Keanu, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice rough and weak. "Cedars-Sinai," Keanu said gently. You were really sick, Jennifer. I brought you here. She tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face. I can't afford this. I need to leave. It's taken care of, Keanu said, moving to her bedside. Don't worry about the money. Just focus on getting better. Who are you? Jennifer asked, and there was something new in her voice now. Not suspicion, but a different kind of confusion. The nurse said Mr. Reeves brought me in. Keanu Reeves. But that's crazy, right? You're just K. You're just some nice guy who brings me soup. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. No more hiding behind dim alleyways and midnight shadows. She was looking at him in full light, really looking, and he could see her mind working. Pieces clicking together. I am just some guy who brings you soup, Keanu said softly. But yeah, I'm also Keanu Reeves. Jennifer stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find words. Then her hand flew to cover her mouth and tears started streaming down her face. Not delicate tears, but big gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Oh my God, she whispered through her fingers. Oh my God, it's really you. Keanu felt his own eyes burning. He took her hand, the one without the IV, and held it gently. Yeah, it's really me. All this time, Jennifer said, crying harder now. All those nights I was talking to you and I didn't even know. How? How did you find me? I wasn't looking, Keanu admitted. I was just walking like I always do and I heard you humming. That song, you remember? The one you used to sing in my car? Something broke open in Jennifer's face, recognition and memory flooding in. We used to drive around Toronto at night. You had that terrible old Honda with the broken heater. The blue one, Keanu said, laughing and crying at the same time. You used to wear my jacket because the car was so cold. They sat there holding hands, both of them crying, as 30 years of separation collapsed into this one moment. Jennifer kept shaking her head like she couldn't believe any of this was real. I'm so sorry, she said suddenly. You shouldn't have to see me like this. I'm such a mess. Don't, Keanu said firmly. Don't apologize. If anyone should be sorry, it's me. I should have found you sooner. How could you have known? Jennifer asked. I didn't know where you were either. I was here, Keanu said. The whole time I was in the same city. If I'd just looked, if I'd tried harder to keep in touch back then. Jennifer squeezed his hand weakly. We were kids, Keanu. Kids make mistakes. We both moved on with our lives. That's what you're supposed to do. But moving on hadn't worked out equally for both of them, had it? The unfairness of it all hit Keanu again. He'd gotten famous, successful, comfortable. She'd lost everything and ended up on the streets. Same city, completely different worlds. What happened to you? He asked gently. How did it get this bad? So Jennifer told him everything. The full story this time, holding nothing back. Her parents dying, the depression, the fire, every bad break and wrong turn that had led her to that alley. Keanu listened to all of it, his heart breaking a little more with each detail. I used to think about you sometimes, Jennifer admitted quietly. Wonder what you were doing if you were happy. Then I'd see you in a movie or on a magazine cover and I'd think, good for him, at least one of us made it. You made it too, Keanu said. You survived. That's not nothing, Jennifer. That's everything. A nurse came in to check Jennifer's vitals, giving Keanu a kind smile. The staff had been great about his presence, probably used to celebrities and understanding that sometimes privacy mattered more than protocol. When the nurse left, Jennifer looked at him seriously. What happens now? She asked. I can't stay here forever, and I can't go back to that alley. You're not going back to that alley, Keanu said firmly. Ever. We're going to figure this out together, okay? One step at a time. I don't want charity, Jennifer said, and there was that stubborn pride again. It's not charity, Keanu said. It's friendship. You were there for me when I had nothing. Remember when I was so nervous before my first big audition that I almost didn't go? You practically shoved me out your door. You told me I could do anything I set my mind to. I remember, Jennifer said softly. Well, now it's my turn, Keanu said. Let me help you. Not because I pity you or because I'm trying to buy your friendship, but because you matter to me. You always have, even when I didn't know where you were. Jennifer was quiet for a long time, tears still sliding down her cheeks. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but I want to pay you back someday, somehow. Deal, Keanu said, even though he had no intention of ever accepting a single dollar from her. They talked for hours that day, filling in the gaps of 30 years. Some stories were happy, some were sad, all of them were honest. Keanu told her about his career, the highs and lows, the personal losses he'd faced. Jennifer told him about the good years in New York, the joy she'd found in photography before everything fell apart. As the sun set outside the hospital window, painting the room in orange and gold, Keanu realized something. Finding Jennifer again wasn't just about helping her. It was about remembering who he'd been before fame had changed everything. She'd known him when he was just a scared kid with dreams. That version of himself still existed somewhere inside, and Jennifer was the link to him. "Thank you," Jennifer said as her eyes started getting heavy again, the medication making her drowsy. "For what?" Keanu asked. "For not giving up on me," she said, "even when I'd given up on myself." Keanu stayed until she fell asleep, then made a promise to himself. He would help Jennifer rebuild her life, but he'd do it the right way. Not by throwing money at the problem, but by giving her the tools and support she needed to save herself. Because he knew her, knew that charity would crush her spirit even as it solved her problems. She needed her dignity back, her purpose, her art, and somehow he was going to help her find all of that again. Jennifer spent 2 weeks in the hospital and Keanu visited every single day. Sometimes he'd bring coffee and they'd talk for hours. Other times he'd just sit quietly while she slept, reading scripts or answering emails, just being there. The staff got used to seeing him, and word somehow never leaked to the press. He was grateful for that small mercy. The doctors said Jennifer was recovering well, but they were concerned about more than just her physical health. Trauma, they explained to Keanu, doesn't heal as quickly as pneumonia. She'd need therapy, support, time to process everything she'd been through. Sending her back out onto the streets would be sentencing her to the same cycle all over again. Keanu had been thinking about this constantly. He'd considered dozens of options. A hotel room, but that felt temporary and impersonal. An apartment, but she might feel trapped or obligated. He needed something that felt like a real home, a place where she could heal and rebuild without feeling like a charity case. So he bought a house. Not a mansion, not something showy that would make her uncomfortable. A small 2-bedroom place in Pasadena with a garden and good light. The neighborhood was quiet, safe, far enough from his own place to give her space but close enough that he could check in regularly. He hired people to furnish it simply but comfortably, nothing fancy, just warm and livable. The hardest part was figuring out how to tell her. He practiced the conversation in his head a dozen different ways, trying to find words that wouldn't make her run. On her last day in the hospital, he finally worked up the courage. "So I've been thinking about what comes next," he said, trying to sound casual. "After you're discharged." Jennifer's face immediately showed worry. "I've been thinking about that too. There are some shelters I can try. The waiting lists are long, but maybe." "Actually," Keanu interrupted gently, "I have another idea. Just hear me out before you say no, okay?" She looked at him suspiciously but nodded. "I have a house," he said carefully. "A small place in Pasadena that I'm not using. It's just sitting there empty, which seems like a waste. I thought maybe you could stay there for a while. Just until you get back on your feet." "Keanu, no," Jennifer said immediately. "That's too much. I can't accept that. Why not?" He asked. "It's empty. Nobody's using it. You'd actually be doing me a favor by keeping an eye on the place." "That's the same lie you told me about the jacket," Jennifer said, a hint of a smile on her face despite her protest. "Okay, you're right," Keanu admitted. "But listen, this isn't about charity or pity or anything like that. You remember when I first came to LA? I stayed on my friend's couch for 6 months. Rick, remember him? He gave me a place to crash while I figured things out. He didn't make me feel bad about it. He just said friends help friends." Jennifer was quiet, her fingers pulling at the hospital blanket. "That was different." "How?" Keanu challenged gently. "Because I was trying to make it as an actor and you're trying to survive? That's not different, Jennifer. You're both just as important, maybe more so." "I don't know how I'd ever pay you back," she said softly. This was the crucial moment. Keanu leaned forward, his voice earnest. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, something to help homeless people, especially artists who've fallen through the cracks, but I don't really know what they need. What would actually help versus what just sounds good on paper." He watched her face carefully. "You've lived it. You know what works and what doesn't. I was hoping you'd consider sharing your insights, maybe even helping me shape the program. That kind of knowledge, that perspective, it's invaluable. Jennifer stared at him. You want my help? I need your help, Keanu said honestly. I can write checks all day long, but that doesn't mean the money will go to the right places or be used in the right ways. You've been in the shelters. You know what's missing, what would make a real difference. That expertise is worth more than rent, Jennifer. Way more. He could see her turning this over in her mind, pride warring with practicality. The genius of his approach, if he did say so himself, was that it was all true. He had been thinking about starting a foundation, though Jennifer's situation had crystallized the idea into something concrete. And he genuinely did need her perspective if he was going to do it right. Just the house? Jennifer asked finally. Nothing else? Well, it's furnished, Keanu said. And I figured you'd need groceries to start. But yeah, that's it. You can stay as long as you need. A month, a year, forever. Whatever works. Not forever, Jennifer said quickly. Just until I can figure things out. Deal, Keanu agreed, trying not to show how relieved he felt. 3 days later, Keanu picked Jennifer up from the hospital. She was dressed in new clothes he'd had delivered, simple jeans and a sweater. Her first outfit in years that wasn't torn or stained. Her hair was clean, pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous as they drove to Pasadena, watching the city pass by like she was seeing it for the first time. When they pulled up to the house, Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. It was a Spanish-style bungalow with a small front yard and a porch. Nothing fancy, but charming in its own way, the kind of place that felt like it had stories to tell. This is it? She asked. This is it, Keanu confirmed. Want to see inside? The house was perfect, even better than he'd hoped. Warm hardwood floors, big windows that let in plenty of natural light, a kitchen that was small but functional. The furniture was comfortable without being expensive. One bedroom was set up for sleeping, the other was empty except for a desk and chair. I thought maybe that could be a workspace, Keanu said, gesturing to the empty room. If you want to do photography again, or whatever else you want to do with it. Jennifer walked through each room slowly, touching things lightly like she was afraid they might disappear. When she got to the backyard, she stopped completely. It was small but beautifully kept, with flower beds and a lemon tree and a little bench in the corner. My mom had a garden like this, Jennifer said quietly. She grew tomatoes every summer. Keanu stood beside her, hands in his pockets. You could do that too if you wanted. The landlord wouldn't mind. She looked at him, tears in her eyes again. Why are you doing all this? Because you matter, Keanu said simply. You mattered to me 30 years ago and you matter now. And because I can. Not everyone gets the chance to help someone they care about. I'm lucky to have this opportunity. Jennifer wiped her eyes. I'm going to make this worth it. I'm going to get better and figure out my life and help with your foundation. I promise. I know you will, Keanu said. But there's no rush, okay? Healing takes time. Over the next few weeks, Keanu watched Jennifer slowly settle into her new life. It wasn't easy. She had nightmares sometimes. Waking up thinking she was back on the streets, she'd have panic attacks in grocery stores, overwhelmed by the choices and the noise. Simple things that most people took for granted, like taking a shower whenever she wanted or sleeping in a real bed, made her cry. But she was trying. Keanu connected her with a therapist who specialized in trauma and homelessness. Dr. Rachel Chen was patient and kind, and slowly Jennifer started opening up about everything she'd been through. The grief over her parents, the shame of losing everything, the fear that had become her constant companion on the streets. Keanu also made sure Jennifer had what she needed to pursue photography again. He left a better camera on her kitchen table one day, along with a note saying he'd found it in his closet and didn't need it. It was a lie, but a kind one. The camera was brand new, professional quality, the kind she'd once dreamed of owning. At first, Jennifer just looked at it. Then she picked it up, felt its weight in her hands. A few days later, Keanu got a text from her. Just 3 words. Thank you for this. She started taking pictures again, slowly at first. The garden, light coming through the kitchen window, her reflection in a mirror. Then she ventured outside, photographing the neighborhood, the people, the ordinary moments that she'd always had a gift for capturing. What surprised Keanu was what Jennifer chose to photograph. She went back to the areas where homeless people lived, not to gawk or exploit, but to document their humanity. She'd sit with people, talk to them, learn their stories, and then ask permission to take their photos. The images she created were stunning, showing not victims or stereotypes but real people with dignity and depth. This is incredible work, Keanu told her one evening when she showed him the latest batch. Seriously, Jennifer, this is gallery quality stuff. It doesn't feel like enough, she said. Taking pictures doesn't help them. It helps more than you think, Keanu argued. People need to see this. They need to understand that homelessness isn't some abstract problem. It's individuals with stories and dreams and worth. This conversation led to another idea. What if they combined Jennifer's photography with the foundation work? They could create an exhibition, raise awareness, maybe even raise funds for the programs they wanted to start. Jennifer could tell her story and help others at the same time. At first, Jennifer resisted. Sharing her story publicly felt too vulnerable, too raw. But the more they talked about it, the more she warmed to the idea. If her experience could help even one person, wasn't that worth the discomfort? They started planning the foundation in earnest. Jennifer would visit shelters, interview people, understand what resources were most needed. Keanu would handle the business side, the fundraising, the logistics. Together, they'd build something meaningful. One evening, about 3 months after Jennifer moved into the house, Keanu stopped by to drop off some documents for the foundation. He found her in the garden, planting tomato seedlings like her mother used to grow. "How are you doing?" he asked, sitting on the bench. Jennifer sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her hands. "You know what's weird? I'm happy. Not all the time and not perfectly, but happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel that again." "You deserve to be happy," Keanu said. "So do you," Jennifer replied, looking at him carefully. "I've been so focused on my own stuff that I haven't asked. Are you happy, Keanu?" It was a simple question, but it made him pause. Was he happy? He had success, money, respect. But he'd also lost people he loved. He'd spent years feeling like he was missing something essential, some connection to the world that fame had made complicated. "I'm happier now than I've been in a long time," he said honestly. "Finding you again, it reminded me of who I used to be, who I wanted to be. I'd forgotten that somewhere along the way." Jennifer smiled. "Maybe we both needed this. Maybe we were supposed to find each other again." "Maybe," Keanu agreed. As the sun set over the garden, turning everything golden, Keanu realized that saving Jennifer hadn't been about money or resources. It had been about seeing her, really seeing her, and refusing to look away. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is simply believe in them when they've stopped believing in themselves. And sometimes, in trying to save someone else, you end up saving yourself too. 1 year after that rainy night in the alley, Keanu stood in an art gallery in downtown Los Angeles, watching people file in for Jennifer's exhibition. The space was packed, a mix of art collectors, journalists, homeless advocates, and regular people who'd heard about the show and wanted to support it. But the most important guests were the ones Jennifer had invited personally, the people she'd photographed, many of whom had never been to an art gallery before. The exhibition was called Scene, simple, powerful, direct. The photographs on the walls showed faces and moments from the streets of Los Angeles, each image accompanied by a short story written by the subject. These weren't photos taken from a distance or stolen in secret. They were collaborations, acts of trust between Jennifer and the people who'd allowed her into their lives. Keanu watched as an elderly man stood in front of his own portrait, tears running down his face. The caption beside it told his story. A veteran who'd struggled with PTSD and lost his housing after medical bills bankrupted him. In Jennifer's photograph, he wasn't a statistic or a problem to be solved. He was a person with kind eyes and a lifetime of experiences etched into his face. "This is unbelievable," someone said beside Keanu. He turned to find one of the gallery owners, practically vibrating with excitement. "We've already sold 8 pieces and the night just started. The Times wants to do a feature. There's even interest from a publisher about turning this into a book." "That's great," Keanu said, genuinely pleased. "All proceeds go to the foundation, right?" "Every penny," the owner confirmed. "This is special, Mr. Reeves, really special." Keanu looked around for Jennifer and found her across the room, talking quietly with a young woman he recognized from one of the photographs. Jennifer was dressed simply in dark pants and a blazer, her hair pulled back. She looked healthy now, strong, nothing like the fragile person he'd carried into the emergency room a year ago. She caught his eye and smiled, excusing herself to come over. "Can you believe this turnout?" she asked, looking slightly overwhelmed. "I can," Keanu said. Your work deserves this. These people deserve to be seen. I'm nervous about the speech, Jennifer admitted. She was scheduled to talk in 30 minutes, to share her own story publicly for the first time. You'll be great, Keanu assured her. Just speak from the heart. That's all anyone needs. When the time came, the gallery quieted down. Jennifer stood at the front of the room, a microphone in her hand, facing a sea of expectant faces. For a moment, she looked terrified. Then she found Keanu in the crowd, took a breath, and began. "A year ago, I was living in an alley," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I was sick, I was scared, and I'd given up on the idea that my life could ever be different. I thought I knew what my story was. Homeless woman, former artist, another person, the system had failed. The end." She paused, looking at the photographs on the walls. "But someone saw me differently. Someone refused to let me disappear. And slowly, with a lot of help and support, I started to see myself differently too." Jennifer talked about her journey, the struggles and setbacks and small victories. She was honest about the hard parts, the nights she'd wanted to give up, the panic attacks and nightmares. But she also talked about hope, about how one person's kindness had created a ripple effect that changed everything. "These photographs," she gestured to the walls, "they're not about me. They're about the incredible, resilient, beautiful people I've met who are fighting every day to survive. Each of them has a story worth hearing. Each of them deserves to be seen, really seen, not just glanced at and walked past." She explained the foundation she and Keanu had created together, the programs they were developing to help homeless individuals not just with shelter and food, but with the things that helped people reclaim their dignity and purpose. Mental health support, job training, arts programs for those who'd once had creative dreams, connection to community. "I'm one of the lucky ones," Jennifer said, her voice catching slightly. "I got a second chance because someone cared enough to help. This foundation exists so that more people can get those second chances, because everyone deserves the opportunity to rebuild their life." The applause when she finished was thunderous. People weren't just clapping politely. They were standing, some crying, moved by her honesty and courage. Keanu felt his own eyes burning with proud tears. After the speeches and the mingling, after most of the guests had left and the gallery was closing, Keanu and Jennifer stood together looking at the photographs one last time. "You did it," Keanu said softly. "You created something beautiful out of all that pain." "We did it," Jennifer corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Want to get some air?" Keanu asked.